Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session on men as allies in the struggle for women's empowerment. My name is Nadeem Mahomed. I am a director and the knowledge lawyer in the employment law department, and I'm joined by my wonderful colleagues, Chris Charter, who's the national practice head of the competition department at CDH, and Gift Xaba, who's an associate in our pro bono department. I just want to bring it a bit back to the workplace, and two very practical things I want to talk about, or ask you to talk about, mention. So the first is the idea of parental leave. So, we've gone some way now as a country in terms of legislation, where they've introduced parental leave, or but more generous parental leave for men, recognizing that men have a role in the nurturing of newborn babies and children, which before wasn't recognized in the same way or acknowledged. But there was this interesting case that came before our courts, where you had a couple who had a child, and the woman she was self-employed, she had her own business, and so she wasn't in the position to take 4 months off from the business that she ran basically on her own. And her partner then sought to have the 4-month maternity leave, or the 6 month, I don't know if it was a more gracious leave policy in that business, to obtain that benefit for nurturing. And the business said no. The employer said, no, you're not entitled, you're not the birthing parent, you're not the mother. You can only get the 10 days. And so it's still, the Constitutional Court still has to pronounce on it, but the High Court said, and look again, the 4 months period, which is in our legislation, was meant for two purposes. And again, who decides that the time period is adequate? One was the recovery of the birthing mother, who says that's enough time, or how much time that requires, who makes that calculation. Probably men were again part of that decision making, deciding what is appropriate or not. And second, 4 months of nurturing. So it's nurture and physiological recovery, right? And the High Court said, look, parental unit should be in a position to decide who is the primary nurturer of the child, or if they want to split the leave in any particular ways, that's the more fair option, right? So just that's one view on it, but it's something many firms and many businesses and many employees don't really question or don't really think about in detail. What does this mean? What does a dress policy mean? Especially when you have a dress policy that's particularly gendered. Men have to wear certain attire, women have to wear certain attire. What does that mean when it comes to these parental obligations? And then connected to that, women, like men, come from backgrounds, right? Gender is not the only identity we have or wear. We have a cultural background, we have a religious background, we have a class background. And there's certain things that then coalesce around that. And there's certain expectations that we have based on those other contexts, right? And so a woman, like a man, but we're talking about women, that comes into the workplace, not just as a woman. They come in with all these other identities, right? Race, culture, and other demands on them. How does the workplace meet these women in terms of those demands that they may have, or expectations that they may have in relation to how they would like to deal with men based on their cultural background? It is common, for example, for women from certain background not to want to extend their hand towards men because they find it's inappropriate. How do those ways of being in the workplace, how is it understood? How is it accommodated? What does that mean for inclusion? So these two things.
Chris, if fair to you.
Yeah, I think you've asked two important questions. I think the first is more sort of nitty gritty. Sort of what can organizations do to create systems and opportunities for where we're not just paying lip service to inclusivity and opportunities for women in the workplace, but we're actually putting systems in place that helps. And I think your observation on parental leave is an extremely important one. I would take it one step further than saying it, you can decide which which parent is going to take it. In some Scandinavian countries, as I understand it, it's actually compulsory that whatever the period is, and they're very progressive. So it's, if it's 9 months of parental leave, it's actually required that each person in that relationship must take at least 4 months, right? That's really, really important, I think, potentially, because we can talk on about the importance of parental leave and that kind of thing. But the truth is that it does, in a work environment, it is going to set you back somewhat.
Yeah.
Being away, currently it does set you back somewhat. Why does it set you back? Because generally it's the men who are in charge, and they see the woman going on maternity leave for 4 months, right? If it was mandated to say that if you have chosen to procreate with someone, you're going to take time off as well, okay? I can guarantee you the men who make the rules will put systems in place to make sure you're not prejudiced because you're out of the office for 4 months.
Yeah.
So I think those kind of more revolutionary type thinking, I think that, for professional service organizations, here in Sandton, for instance, that we don't have more corporate and professional crèches in town, where if you're a caregiver, man or woman, you can drop your kid off at the corporate crèche in the morning at 7 o'clock, pick him up at 5 o'clock in the afternoon or 5:30. That's generally the hours for the corporate crèche. It's in the neighborhood, practically across the road. You can work a full day without having all those anxieties about my kid is a 45-minute commute away or more, etc. And you can be more productive in the office, and that makes it much more easy, I think, for those shared responsibilities at home. And I can talk a lot. I am a parent of 3 children, and there's a lot to be said for how I think society can change in that regard. Your other question, I think, was more about just some of the peculiar challenges of a modern melting pot society, where we have to contend not with, simple interaction from a gender perspective. And again, here, obviously, this is part of the problem, is I don't have the same kind of insights and experience from a cultural perspective as a lot of people. And those sort of intersectionalities are important, I think, to understand. I, again, don't prefer the term intersectionality, because I think it's come to be a little bit of a portmanteau for why life is so hard for certain people in society. And I don't think that's a healthy way to look at things. But it's useful to understand that in every interaction you have, there is so much more to that than your own perspective. And if I can take one thing out of what you say is again, for people to just be willing to just pause and reflect and say that, someone has, if a woman is wearing a hijab, or if she's, reluctant to make eye contact or something, that is not something that I should overlay my cultural experience. As I do come from very different perspectives and different issues. And that goes to not just those sort of high level major cultural issues, but just how people have been brought up, whether they're shy. Shyness can be mistaken for being aloof, So just to put yourself in the other person's position and saying, let's just try and, not judge, not try and read into people's approach with me, and let's just work together to get the job done. And I think that's part of how to deal with those things. But there are going to be, a lot of challenges in terms of narrowing all of those different things up. But I think the more we talk about it, the more we acknowledge it,
and the more we're open to learning. For sure.
Exactly. For sure. First thing that I think that these sort of policies and protocols on gender equality can do is make men feel like they are muscling in on the conversation. Yeah. And I think you made some important points about men being more willing to listen and not trying to sort of drive the conversation. Not resisting that temptation to kind of sum up everything and say, right, we have a solution, just listen sometimes. But by the same token, I think there are men who feel it's better and safer to say nothing. Safer to stay out of it, and I think that's not healthy either.
It'll definitely be part of the conversation.
The views and information expressed are those of the contributors at the time of publication and do not necessarily present those of the firm. All content is provided for general purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. We make no representations, warranties, or guarantees, whether expressed or implied, that the content on our podcast is accurate, complete, up-to-date, or reflects the current law. We accept no responsibility for any loss or damage, whether direct or consequential, arising from reliance on the information which is presented here.